Right, this is going to be episode 53 of OverSight. Sadly, I've just realised now that I've noticed it's episode 53, Monty, I completely fucked up what should have been the obvious, like, cheesy intro to the last one. Because since we talked so much about the Washington Justice, and it was episode 52, and 52 is actually associated with DC Comics, and obviously the Justice League is part of it. I could have done so much with that. Also, I could have made some sort of joke about how the Washington Justice has done a reverse of what the Justice League franchise has done in movies and pop culture. They've actually tanked in the world of movies and culture, whereas the other one's on the way up to the top, isn't it? So there was so much could have been done there. Turns out you need to actually put effort into shit intros. So didn't put any effort into this one either, by the way, just giving everyone a spoiler there. So I will do that thing where I introduce the guests so we don't forget to do that and just get 30 minutes in and then just hope everyone knows, which to be fair, you should. Like, you can just look it up. It's in the description box for a start off anyway. But in the bottom,
to be fair, 50% of the time you actually fuck up who's in the description box. So
That's
it
true.
does get confusing.
The problem when you've done way too many podcasts is the amount of times now that, like, the wrong overlays on, the wrong text just copied and pasted, like, it's getting out of control, I will say that. But eventually we'll just hire someone else to do that for very little money. And no thanks whatsoever, no credit either. So
we also don't make any money really off this show.
That's true. That's true. Right. But the secret is, though, Monty, by not making any money, we are free to be complete elitists and basically continue to give the metaphorical middle finger to the fans and never imply that they did anything for us. I mean, we're free to do that anyway. But
it keeps our cred.
Yeah, just don't feel guilty about it. Right. So in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Gods, who I think you've come on an episode before, right, Gods? Didn't you come on way back in the day?
A long time ago, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Sure. So obviously, in the meantime, you've been through Contenders, and he's playing with the Toronto Defiant. And then the bottom left-hand corner, we've got Packing10, who is a coach with the LA Valiant, also was working through Contenders himself at one point in time. Right. Why don't we start talking about the Toronto Defiant initially then, Monty? It's not a team we've actually discussed that often on the show, mainly when people from the team have come on. Where do you think this team's at the moment for you?
I mean, I think the team is, in spite of their record, actually outperforming their record overall. And I think it's been an interesting experiment. And I've talked to Gods a little bit about this. But obviously Gods was part of a process that this team was moving away from having an all Korean roster into having a mixed roster. And now you guys recently have been starting like a majority Western roster with 4 of the Western players and your like Korean support line. So what's the plan? And also, I mean, you probably can't talk about this, but Bishop was recently let go as a coach. So it's been a little bit turbulent for you guys. But why are you guys now starting like Sherrick or as your main tank? Is this something that you feel more comfortable with as a tank duo, or what's precipitated this change for you guys?
Well, I think as far as like the changes within the org and stuff like that, obviously as a player, I try not to care too much about that. Kind of try to focus on the game. For us, though, our come up has kind of been when we started kind of focusing on Orisa Hog and stuff more, which requires really good communication. And obviously, me and Yakong don't exactly have that. So putting in Sherrick was kind of like the thought process for that, I think, is just like creating a better, I guess it's easier for our team to play around us too when we're like talking about what we're going to do a lot more. So I think that's kind of been the main reason for putting in Sherrick. He's been doing pretty well as well in the Orisa, so it works.
On the last show that we did with you, I'm actually remembering now, I asked you about why you weren't in the Overwatch League, basically. Like, why were you playing in the Contenders stage? Because obviously you're a well-known player from the early days of Overwatch. Why has it taken so long to get in the Overwatch? Have you actually like pushed for it yourself hard? I mean, as a player, you're pretty well known as a all-around player.
I didn't really do anything special, to be honest. I wanted to get in honestly. Like when I was gonna get into Overwatch League, I guess initially, like getting trials early on, I kind of felt like, well, I'm underperforming compared to the people that are getting in ahead of me, and so I should really just focus on the game. And I guess for a lot of players, it's better to just focus on getting connections and
sure,
like knowing people and stuff like that. But for me, I really just wanted to get in like based off of just merit, like just playing the game. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing, having a good, successful season. And Contenders kind of got me here, I guess.
Too honourable, Monty. He lives by some sort of like a Bushido code or something. I like it. I appreciate that.
Well, I think Gods has had a really interesting career because he's played multiple different positions, and like you used to play damage when you were on C9, and now you have switched over to the flex tank role, but you're still an extremely flexible player overall. So with the role lock coming in, is this something that you feel has taken away some of your strengths as a player, considering that you were like one of the most flexible players, I would say, in the league?
I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's greatly benefited me to play 2-2-2. Mainly just because out of all the DPS heroes that I can play, Sombra is not really one of them. So for me, like having to play that was actually really difficult. I mean, when I was
in this specific meta,
yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, playing it in like triple DPS stuff, or even 4 DPS, like in stage 3 and stuff, or even in Sombra Goats, like it was definitely learning something completely new. So if it was like something I'd played before, then I think we would have done a lot better, maybe. But I had to spend a lot of time really working on it. I played like 8 hours of ranked for a week, just playing Sombra only and studying VODs and stuff. And so it was definitely challenging. I think 2-2-2 has been, honestly, for me, I'm probably playing the best I ever have. And so I think 2-2-2 is a big part of that, being able to play Roadhog and stuff again, stuff I haven't played for, a year plus. So one of my best heroes. So this meta is definitely kind of favoring me a bit right now.
Okay.
So Packing, I want to talk to you because both of you guys, I think, were interesting to get together on this episode because both of your teams have moved away from Korean players, right? So this has been, when we look at the history of esports and Overwatch, obviously Korean players have been extremely dominant, but you guys have both taken a different approach, and I think that, in fact, both of your teams have gotten rid of Korean players. You ended up trading Fate to the Mayhem, in exchange for some Western players. And then you got rid of Izayaki and traded him over to the Shanghai Dragons. But both of your teams, I think, have been doing better as a result, or have looked at like a higher upside. So do you think that Western players have been underutilized in Overwatch League, and that's why you were so aggressive about picking up some Western players that may have flown under the radar of other teams?
Yeah, not really. I think it was more about our infrastructure and having the proper. We want to be a full international team. We want Western players, NA, EU, we want Eastern players, China, Korea. We don't care where the players are from as long as they fit into the system. So our infrastructure early this year after Moon and Andrew left, we really didn't have much of an infrastructure for Korean players. So trying to build that mid-season along with trying to see the growth we wanted from the team and try to get the team back in the place we wanted, they were kind of like diverging goals. So for us, we were able to kind of make the deals that we did, move a little bit more towards a Western roster for this year. But the ultimate goal is we don't care where the players are from. International is always going to be our goal. And we'd love to have good Korean players. We'd love to have good Western players. Doesn't matter as long as you fit the system.
So how has that system changed now that you are the head coach of this team? Because I know Moon, and I was present at practices for the Valiant when Moon was coaching, and Moon, I think he's very much like an idealistic coach. And what I mean by that is that he's a very meta coach. Like, he wants to play to the meta, and he wants his players to fit the most ideal form of Overwatch that could be played at a certain time, rather than creating strategies that suit his players. At least that was
kind of a
take.
Traditional Korean MO for a coach, though, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, that was definitely in my experience, that was his method of looking at the game. So what is the new system that the Valiant has? Like, what is the current philosophy? How are you coaching this?
It's structure, man. Everything we do has purpose, from when the players get there in the morning to when they're leaving at night. We introduced a lot of new unique things that other teams just don't do. And a big part of it, such as they get homework. They do performance blocks where we ice down the player room, and they're not focused about improving. They're focused on winning. We ice down the room. We they come in their jerseys. They treat it like it's a match, so we could get away from some of the stage anxiety. And
what does that term mean? Ice down?
We put extra coolers in there, so that way
literally
air conditioning.
Cool.
So it's like stage.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, you've been in the Blizzard arena, like, it's really fucking cold in there.
Yeah,
Thorin.
we actually a funny story about that is a couple weeks ago, which I'll get into kind of more of the structure in a little bit, but a couple weeks ago was the first week we were doing it because we wanted to really introduce it here in stage 4, since every match for us was really going to be a playoff game, really. So the first day when Mike the GM put the extra air conditioner unit in the player room, it actually blew a fuse. And it ended up being a lot hotter in there than it should have been because we couldn't switch the fuse back on because there was a meeting in the other room. But they get a reward if they win that. They get their homework if they don't lose that. If they lose that, the players get to vote on an MVP if they win, and that guy gets an extra reward. We do.
What type of a reward are we talking about?
We're talking about something small, like free lunch, something like that.
Right. Okay.
The next day and all that kind of stuff. We do very structured full block of player development, long days on Monday, so that way we could use that block, to watch a movie. We watched The Replacements back in early stage 3, because there was a goal with it. Are
these all themed movies then, basically?
We did The Replacements one time. We break down into groups and we cycle through groups with different coaches. Another time, there's plenty of different ideas that go through with everything we're doing. But yeah, it's all about structure. It's all about, mixing up the training regimen once you start to see any type of complacency. So that way, you always see that growth, just like weight training, just like traditional sports. That's really the mentality I bring. And Promise and Stoop and Reprise, they do an absolutely outstanding job in the day-to-day, making sure that, the vision that I have in place and what I want to see is getting taken care of every day. And, it couldn't be better. So we're really happy with that. And, we just keep moving forward.
That's a pretty good idea, though, Monty. The idea of trying to attract, because obviously you can't actually fully recreate the environment of being on the stage setup, but actually even just adjusting that part's not a bad idea. It reminds me of the early days of Counter-Strike. There were some players who were the initial top pros, where that's one thing they did was, because at the time, we didn't have classy event setups. It was literally basically a fold-out table from Staples or something. And so what they would do is they actually just went and bought the exact tables that all the big tournaments used and would just play at home, measure the height and all that stuff. So I think that stuff, even if it only adds 0.1%, if that brings comfort to someone's mind, I could see it helping.
Yeah, and
a lot of the teams actually have purchased the same desks, so they try and recreate the environment on stage pretty accurately. Either the teams have purchased the same desks, or they have desks at the same height as on stage, same chairs, even though the chairs have changed now. Same monitors, equipment setup. So most teams, teams that I've visited, team houses, especially the Dallas Fuel, have all of that down to a T in their practice facility. So many teams try and mirror that. Is that your experience, Gods, with the Defiant? Do you guys try and mirror the stage setup at all?
Not particularly at the moment. We're scrimming from the same house that we live in. So, to be honest, I think it's pretty suboptimal to do that. I think it causes some issues with productivity and stuff like that, living in the same space that you actually practice from. So, in my experience so far, not yet, but hopefully that'll change.
Okay.
So, that's always been a debate in esports. And when back in the day, before teams were being purchased for tens of millions of dollars, it was mostly, there's always been that debate as to how effective team houses can be. Mostly it was a cost issue for teams, it was simply much cheaper to rent a massive house than it was to rent a separate practice facility and a bunch of individual apartments. And
obviously you wouldn't on your own salary yourself be able to rent an apartment anywhere.
Yeah. Well, you could. It would just be back in the day when we weren't paying players several $100,000 a year where they could afford their own apartments. Now players get paid a lot more than they used to. But even so, I think part of being a player, I think the team should pay for housing in general for the players. I think it's just part of the package of being a pro player is that you get your apartment, you're forced to move somewhere, you get your apartment paid for. But that's neither here nor there. But we've seen, at least in Overwatch League, some pretty different ways of handling this situation. And I think it's to me, as a former team owner, it's really interesting to see the different ways in which teams do it. Because, for example, the London Spitfire were moved into individual apartments when they first came to LA, but the players themselves wanted to live in a team house, so then they switched to a team house environment. Okay. But most Korean players are used to living in team houses because that's how they do it in Korea, and just culturally, most Korean people live with their parents until they get married, and that's often when they're 30. And it's a very collectivistic society. They're used to living together from being in the military. So people have been through the Korean military for a couple of years, are used to bunking up with other people. And even the top teams in Korea will still like share rooms and have bunk beds and shit like that. Even players that are making literally millions of dollars a year. So they, like the Spitfire players, wanted to live together in that environment. But I think a lot of other teams have different philosophies, especially older teams like the Outlaws all live in their own apartments. But the San Francisco Shock live in 2 different team houses. But for me, it's like, I think if you are an older player and you want to live alone, that's okay. I wouldn't, if I owned a team, I think I would have a team house just to enforce discipline for players that were like under 21. If this was like your first time living alone, then I, as an owner, I think I would feel more comfortable if you were in a more controlled environment with a manager and cooks and everything like that. So I think it really depends, but there's also the argument, well, for example, the Valiant have their own practice facility and then they have an apartment building next door, right, where the players live. So there's like some level of separation.
It's about, I would say, 5-10 minute Uber ride into the facility from the apartments. So, but I think like for us, I mean, we have a lot of young players on the team, with even like Indy and Kyle and even some of the guys like Criv and Brady for an extent, at least for my definition of young. You really only have 2 older players with Fact and Scott on the team, but the thing is, I think you still can hold the accountability and make sure that there is that discipline being instilled in the apartments. If everybody's doing their part. So I think there's definitely benefits to both, the team house and the apartment wise, but I think it really just depends on the players, honestly. What they need and, how mature they are and like how well you're like, I don't want to say the structure, but the environment is and how conducive it is for them to grow and, not only as players, but as people.
So why is it that you want to not live in a team house, Gods?
Man. So in my experience so far in team houses, it's mostly just whenever you're not just in your room with the door locked, even if you're sharing a room, it seems like you're in public essentially. So you're downstairs, you're playing, you're like trying to practice or whatever, or watch a VOD, or even if you're just having another conversation and playing a different game or something like that, it still feels like, to me at least, that I'm in like a public space. Like it almost feels like I'm living in a PC bang all the time, and then I just go upstairs to sleep. And so that feeling is not really good to me. I like to have separation to some degree. I mean, even when I was playing from home, I still felt that separation because at least when I'm done playing, I don't have to like go to a public space. I'm in my room, in my house, it's comfortable, whatever. So for me, like the comfort factor actually matters a lot. And also the separation and like the ability to have privacy matters a lot, because I just like to be kind of solitary when I'm not interacting with my team and like practicing and stuff. I like to just kind of have time to myself. So I think that's probably the biggest issue that I have with team houses in general.
Okay.
So when I had a team, one of the things that we were looking at doing was actually purchasing. So this is an interesting idea that nobody's really taken the concept and run with it even to this point. So we were looking in Los Angeles about purchasing like an old motel and then converting it, like a 30-room old motel, and then converting it into a player and practice facility. And the logic behind this was, we wanted to be able to put all of our players from all of our teams in one location, which I think like Genji has sort of done that in Korea. So I haven't been to their Seoul facility, but in general, this has not been something that, like, the Korean teams have had shared practice facilities for their different rosters across games like StarCraft and League of Legends and Overwatch, have all practiced out of the same building. So I guess they've done it to a limited degree. But the idea would be to convert all of the rooms into just individual player rooms, have a commercial kitchen where everybody could be in a dining hall together. And the reason why we wanted to do this was it's like the perfect level for me for having the players have their own privacy. And also, I think one of the detriments of having a team house is there's no escape. So like if you're frustrated with your teammate or you need some like distance from them because you guys are so invested together in, winning and performing well, that it can be I think, hard to, if you're in a team house, to like escape that, or if you need to like get away from it a little bit. But the idea would be that if, for example, you have a different person who, while they don't play the same game as you, they still are a professional player, so they understand your situation. So you could always like go hang out with the Counter-Strike guys or whatever, make friends with them, where they share your concerns, but you're not as invested, let's say, in their level of performance, and they're not invested in yours. So it's kind of a break socially. But also the idea is that you can create a much more core set of team values across all of your different games. Because I feel like right now, many organizations, it's like the League of Legends team has their own identity and the Overwatch team has their own identity, and there's no real like sense of what it means to be together. Like, you're not out there, with the Splice gods, because they're in Europe, like playing League of Legends. But if you could be in the same general environment, that you might have more shared team values. Or, for example, with the Valiant, you guys have your practice facility. Do you run other teams out of there right now?
Right now, I know the Clash team's there. I don't really know what's going on with like the League of Legends stuff and everything after the whole Optic deal and all that stuff.
You probably will, though.
Yeah, the goal. Yeah, that's the goal. Eventually, is for everybody to be operating out of out of the same space. Still the same mentality of hey, everybody's gonna have their apartments and they'll have a place to go home. And because the thing is, even with video games, right? Like playing games professionally, like you still need to be able to separate work from recreational time, because you're gonna get burnt out if you don't.
Right.
So I think the goal is to have everybody in one giant facility, and then that way you could build those bonds and meet more people, get different opinions. Even for coaching wise, like that'd be great to be able to interact with different people with different views, ideologies on how they run things. And you could always learn from each other. But then at the same time, you get to go home, and your home's your home, and you don't need to really worry about stuff then. So
sure. All right, let's start talking about some of the teams then. One thing I want to ask, Gods, is Monty alluded to earlier the fact that the team is doing better this stage. Like, yeah, the record still shows you've only got one win, but as people may know from a now infamous video, the team went 0-7 last stage. And I don't think people fully know, like, when you made that video where you were kind of like memeing, was that like just purely for memes and for lols, or did it sort of come from like a dark place of like, well, better laugh so we don't cry about how horrible it is to go 0-7 and win 4 maps? So what was the mood for you inside the team when the stage 3 went so badly?
Well, I mean, for that specific video, that's just my sense of humor. Like, I was just like kind of laughing at us, like, okay, wow, I can't believe that happened, right? I'm not gonna like carry that into the next stage or even carry that into the next day. So that was really just like the humor. I wanted it to kind of like people be able to see that we're not like falling apart completely. And for us, I guess, can you like rephrase the question a little bit? I kind of forgot. What
is it like now, for example? Like, have things changed now since you've won a lot more maps, you have more competitive games? You were saying yourself you like the new meta more.
Yeah, I think it gave us like a fresh start. There was a lot of like trust issues, I think, when you're putting in a lot of work every week and then going to the match and then failing. So you kind of like lose a little bit of trust with your teammates. When you start winning or like doing well together, I guess it kind of snowballs and you start feeling like, oh, you trust this guy, and you start trusting them more and playing better. And in Overwatch, it's like, if you're not trusting your teammates, you're kind of inherently making worse decisions because you're not relying on them the way you need to be. Especially in the meta as it is right now. So going into 2-2-2, we got like a reset, and that was honestly like a saving grace for us. So we got like that, not just in like the team dynamic, but like new strategies, right? So we weren't just ramming our head against the wall trying to play 4 DPS or whatever.
Sure.
So it was definitely extremely good timing for us, I'd say.
Actually, Monty, that's one aspect that people probably don't consider as to why I actually think you also get more burnout in games like League and Overwatch is when you have to play in a league and your team loses, you have to play the same amount of games. So if you're going to lose every game, you will literally lose 7 games, 15 games, 28 games. In Counter-Strike tournament, if you come last, you might just lose 2 games and go home. Like, in a weird way, it gives you more of a breather in that sense. In fact, you actually have time even then to have time off or start prepping for the next tournament. It makes it a lot harder, I imagine, because like I say, if you're the teams at the bottom, you're just looking down that line going, great, what? And the next week we play London and then we play Washington. Like, fucking hell, where's this going to end?
Yeah, I do think that's that's an issue. And I guess like what's nice is that at least in Overwatch, there and in League, like there's a difference. You have the spring split and the summer split. So there's a reset. So for us, it's like, oh, well, we have a new stage. Like if we do well this stage, even if our overall record isn't going to be good enough to reach season playoffs, maybe we could reach stage playoffs. So it constantly gives you that goal, which is one of the things I'm worried about next year with the stages. So I'm not like, if we don't have stages next year, then will that reset occur? But most professional sports seem to get through it okay with, at least in America, with the league format. So
what do you think about that, Packing, as a coach? Because obviously this must be something, I mean, Valiant's been through losing times in the past. I know it was before you got there, but it's obviously something where you delve into the psychological field here. It's not just coaching, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, for the first stage, I was brought on in November as an assistant for Valiant. So, I was able to experience what was going on in the early stage and everything like that, early stages and everything. And the easiest way to put it is when you lose, it's easy to lose. When you win, it's easy to win. When you lose 4 or 5 in a row, the players, there's a lot of anxiety. They don't want to go on stage. Like like you go and it's like, hey, this game is like really winnable. We're actually like a really good team, but there's a little bit of fear. There's a little bit of anxiety. There's, all those psychological factors and values that are coming in there now. And then the same thing when you're winning, right? Like you win 1, you win 2 in a row, you win 3 in a row. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. You feel like you could beat anybody. So, the psychological aspect really plays a big part in that. And that's why I think, like God said, the meta change is really good for a mental break and for them to, really rebound on that. And then the same thing for us after stage 1, when I took over, it was really, hey, listen, this is not going to be an overnight fix. Like we're going to have to keep trudging along. We're going to do our best, fix what's wrong and, just keep moving forward. Once we get one of those wins under our belt, it's going to be a lot easier. And, it feels like the weight of the world's lifted off their shoulders. So, yeah, I mean, it is really easy to lose when you're losing, easy to win when you're winning. So.
Sure. What is it? Give us, Packing, what would like the basic scouting report of the Toronto Defiant be?
Well, we didn't play them this stage, so we really don't have anything. I don't even think we scrimmed them this stage, so we don't really have. I actually think we're scrimming them today, so we don't really have anything on them. So
they've earned their win. Your good graces. They're allowed 1 scrim now. If you win another match, you get another scrim. That's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, it just works the way it does.
Sure.
When you just get what you can. You try to book with the best partners you can, and you go from there, right? So, I think the big thing with the 2-2-2 lock was, it really changed the dynamic because everybody books scrims, 2, 3, 4 weeks in advance. So, once these teams, really start seeing success and, like Justice and, Defiant's been playing really well and things like that. Florida, earlier on, those are the teams that you'd be like, hey, listen, like, let's try to book, away from those teams and, book, Shock, Vancouver, Glad, stuff like that. And now it's like, hey, listen, Justice scrims are really good scrims. Same thing with Toronto and Mayhem and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Okay. Right, Gods, when you were playing down on the Contenders team, you were playing with someone who now has also come up to the main team, Logix, obviously the guy everyone remembers from the early stages of the Overwatch League. And he's someone where, from the outside at least, I mean, it seems fairly obvious, like he was a very, very, very much a DPS specialist. Like it makes sense why in the GOATS meta he wasn't around as much. What has it been like playing with him on the Contenders team and then coming back up to the main team? Like, what do you think of him at the current state?
Well, I think Logix was like a classic example of a DPS player that's like stuck on Zarya, and he wasn't like a terrible Zarya, but you could tell that there was like so much potential there that he just couldn't access. And it sucks to see, like, at the time it sucked to see like a S+ tier player that's just stuck on a role that he just doesn't want to play or doesn't know how to play as well as, like, let's say Widowmaker or something. And so I guess on Contenders I still knew, like, the whole time I was like, I would try to find compositions where like he could play DPS and he would just pop off every time, and he still had it, and I just knew that. So even back then I was like kind of surprised that, because before I joined that team in Contenders they were not doing very well, and after getting to play with them I was like, I couldn't really figure out why. And I guess seeing him come into Overwatch League and do really well has been kind of satisfying, because I guess at the time I knew. I was just like, I was thinking it the whole time.
Sure. Because I mean, coming from an FPS background, Monty, like he was one of the. I always thought he was the best part of those bad mayhem teams. Like he was the guy who actually could potentially hard carry and pop off.
I mean, well, there was Saya player as well, right? Who is still
sure, towards the end,
still popping off. But yeah, I think Logix is an extremely skilled mechanical player, and it's nice to see him in the Overwatch League. It's been interesting because sometimes it feels, being in the Overwatch League, like why I was asking questions about moving towards a Western roster is that sometimes it feels like a lot of the Western players that are, I think, really good are overlooked a lot of the time when it comes to Overwatch League, and like put on contenders teams or retiring or stuff like that. And I think Logix is absolutely deserving of being in the league. And it's just nice to see that. And I think we've seen some really like breakout performances from Western players recently, especially at damage dealing positions. I mean, if you're looking at Corey right now, his performance is unreal. It's super good. So I feel like there have been instances where kind of mediocre Korean players have been picked up, either because teams don't want to go with the mixed roster, which is legitimately, I think, a hard thing to manage. And it takes time in order to create that synergy due to language barriers. But I think in the end, it's very possible. So I think many teams don't want to move in that direction. They want to stay with the Korean roster, which leads to perhaps less capable players being put in, but at least there's not that lag time where it takes a few weeks or months or whatever to get that synergy in game because of language barriers. So how has that been for you, Packing, when it comes to integrate? I mean, at this point, most of your Korean players have been there for a very long time, but is that a challenge for you as a coach?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's all about that, like the infrastructure, right? So, if you have a good infrastructure in place and you have the resources for them, with the like language lessons and like a comfortability level for them, and other Korean players or staff to be able to like culturally just fit in, right? Because it's a big change moving from Korea to the United States, and it's completely different dynamics. I've never personally been to Korea, but obviously coaching the game, you learn a lot about how like their core values and what they prioritize and things are. So yeah, I think it's a big challenge. Mixed rosters I think have the highest potential, but it's definitely the hardest thing to manage and the hardest thing to really, like you said, pull out all the potential, because you're losing efficiency, because if you're going to be English speaking, you need them to take the language lessons and this and that and everything else. You need them to feel comfortable, and even more so like running practice day to day. Like some Korean players want to focus on things that Western players don't, and then there's different opinions and different ideas, which if presented properly are really good, and if managed properly are really good. But a lot of the time, you don't want there to end up being that clique, because as soon as you start seeing that there's like a Western Korean player divide or something like that, it's probably too far gone.
Which is literally what happened to you guys. Yeah,
I mean, it was like when you lose a lot of games, it's easy for stuff like that to happen. And it just sucks. You can only do so much to kind of pull it out of the gutter. But it sucks. And that's, like I said, once it gets to that point, it's damn near impossible to mend. So
one thing you said there that was intriguing was when you said like some of the Korean players might want to practice different things. In Overwatch, is there anything along the lines of like, because one of the things I know from other esports games is Koreans love to like break everything down to the smallest component and then basically try and master the component and then build it back up. It's like a systems-based approach. And so in other games, famously, they love any kind of like a sandbox mode or a map that practices one thing over and over again. And whereas like traditionally the Western player will just play ranked basically, or play a pickup or something and basically play a normal game and try and, in a well-rounded way, get a bit of practice at everything. I've noticed Koreans like to kind of like, it's almost the modern sports approach, actually. You just focus on one little thing and you drill it as much as you can. Is there any of that in Overwatch?
There is. I think one of the big things is from what I've been hearing in other teams is a lot of the like full Korean teams like to like Mondays they'll just do review all day, 6-8 hours they'll just sit there, and as a Western coach, as someone who's tried, different things. To me, that's not as efficient as it could be when you could, structure it more in a way that, you do a very intensive review in the morning, make sure you're hitting on key points. Then you go into a scrim and you play multiple maps or the same map multiple times, and you really focus on those things. And then you have goals on the off maps as to, specific, niche things you're working on. And then at the end of the day, in between the next scrim, you review it again and so on and so forth, rinse and repeat. I think there's just, because of the different values and different ways people were brought up and culturally how things are different, there's different ideologies on it. And not to say one's better than the other, but it comes down to, what works best for the team you're on and the players you have. Sure. Especially in a mixed roster, right? You need to be able to manage both and manage the expectations so that everybody knows, hey, everybody's going to feel comfortable. Everybody's going to do what they think is important, and effectively find a way to make growth happen out of it. So,
okay. Obviously, we're speaking in generalizations when we're talking in this sense, but is there any kind of a divide in terms of, like, when you say like VOD review aspects, do Korean players generally want to do that? Do they want to go over every detail?
Like I said, we have it in a really good place that, everybody's comfortable, with what we're doing, and how things are set up. And like I said, we try to switch it up, every now and then with, like different kinds of things we're doing, like I mentioned before. So always trying to, get them out of their comfort zone is really important. So for them to be comfortable one week and, be able to do a longer review and stuff like that, is really good. And then next week, something that pulls them out of their comfort zone and puts other people in their comfort zone. Really, really important.
Okay. Gods, what is it like in Defiant? Like, is review something that's heavily a part of your approach?
I think what's most important is not actually the amount of review that you do, but more just the structure involved in it. So making sure that before you scrim, everyone knows what you're working on is super important, especially when you have the language barrier, because the players, when you have that like language barrier, they can't like delegate any responsibility. Like, I want you to do this in this map, or I can't say that during a round, really. So it's important that in the review that everything's fully translated and understood from both sides. And both players should be able to like voice what they think they need to do and stuff like that in the review, and then going into scrims knowing that. I think that's super important. So for us, like, going into like 4-5 hours review, I think that's just completely overkill. It's more important to be concise and like fully communicated than it is to have like a long review.
I think a lot of teams, this is why they have coaches that are specifically like cutting clips and like editing them together so that you have a more efficient review, just like of these moments that need work on. Like, coaching in esports is getting pretty advanced compared to what it used to be. And it's been fun to see the evolution of it visiting a lot of these team houses. So speaking of coaching, Gods, your head coach was let go, it appears. Can you say I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but can you say anything about that? Or like, what can you say about that whole situation and why the decision was made?
I think I wouldn't know where to draw the line on talking about stuff like that when it's related to the org and like staff changes. So I probably just would refrain from saying much.
Fair enough. So what is your coaching situation now then?
Our coaching situation right now is obviously impacted by the departure of Bishop, because now we don't necessarily have a head coach role. So going into the last week, we're kind of all just trying to make it work and I guess figure out like what our team identity is now. I guess that's kind of been an issue for us the whole stage, and throughout the 2 stages that I've played, is just kind of trying to deal with outside things and making sure that we can still practice and focus on the game is probably our goal for this last week.
What precipitated the change to signing you and a bunch of these other Western players? Do you know what was the impetus for that, moving away from the all-Korean roster?
Well, part of it was probably just an opportunistic thing, because you had me and Logix and Shirik all playing for the Contenders team and actively scrimming against the main roster. And they were sitting in on scrims and seeing and recognizing things that they liked, I guess, especially when it came to communication and the way that we kind of talk to each other, and we're putting in a lot of effort to try to do well. And I think they just saw that, and part of it was probably maybe a brand thing, like, okay, we want to have some more Western players, but at the same time, they had an opportunity, and I think that's probably why they took it.
Fair enough. What about then? Let's talk about the win you had against the Shanghai Dragons. Now, obviously, this stage rather, they haven't had the same performance they had last stage, where they were the best team at the end and they won the whole thing. What did you think about this match against them?
To be honest, I kind of felt like we were going to win. There was one moment that I remember during the match where I was like, okay, we won already. The map wasn't over. I was like, we won. They're boomed. That was it. And to be honest, I haven't been feeling that too much lately in the last couple of stages. So I think versus Shanghai specifically, it was, and versus other teams as well, and you see this a lot, is matchups matter a lot right now. And the maps matter a lot. So a team that's strong on Orisa Hog maps versus a team that wants to play Pharah, which was us versus Shanghai Dragons, they struggled a lot versus that. And so I think that matchup mattered. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're like significantly better than them or anything because we got the win out. And I think you see a lot of teams matching up where it's like one team beats the other and then gets beat by a perceived worse team. And so I guess right now it's just I don't know. I think it's up in the air who's actually good, and that match versus them was kind of a high variance one that we just happened to come out on top on.
Sure. You know, Monty, that's one thing that I still have as a big criticism of the Overwatch League format is not only do you play different people each stage, so it means you have to add so much context into the standings, but we actually almost take it for granted that you play these pre-selected maps, and yet the maps are different depending on what the opponent is. So like that can obviously skew it, like he's saying here, right? I mean, famously, there's obviously teams that would massively benefit from that in the past.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
it's a bit of a weird element, right?
Yeah. And I think this stage in general has been rife with surprises, partially because the meta is not set in stone and teams are still figuring it out. But, you know, honestly, you know, I hate to say it, but this is, in many ways, this is probably one of the worst case scenarios with the current meta, is that when we entered into the role lock and then we get teams like the Justice who have a very, very real chance of going 7-0 this stage, yet still missing the playoffs, right? It's not a great look, I think, in terms of the competitive integrity of the league and the changes that were being made, to have a team that was 19th or 20th place throughout most of the season, all of a sudden going on a tear, and then we end the stage and they can't make playoffs in spite of arguably being one of the best teams in the league right now.
Sure. I mean, obviously what makes it different from a sport is, in a sport, if you have a great hot streak at the end but you don't make the playoffs, we say, well, it's your fault for not doing it at the beginning of the tournament. But it's like a different game now, isn't it? So The problem is, if they really feel like the best at the end of the stage, it is going to be a bit of a hype killer for the playoffs in that regard. You want to see them face whoever they face, you know.
And it goes the other way too, with like NYXL look like hot trash right now. Like they look absolutely fucking terrible. And you know, they're probably going to be the number 2 seed in the playoffs. Like I was casting the Hangzhou New York game this week, and it was horrible Overwatch. It was painful to get through. And then yesterday they just got absolutely shit stomped by the Guangzhou Charge, to the degree that they got full held on all 3 maps it's possible to full hold somebody on Assault, Hybrid, and Escort. I mean, that's embarrassing. Like,
thoughts?
You definitely don't like to see that. As a coach, you definitely don't like to see that. So, it's something. I kind of agree. The thing is, with the meta change 3/4 of the way through the season, like, I mean, it's tough, because especially for, you know, like a team like us, who's, you know, we grew in stage 2, we did really well in stage 3. You know, we're continuing to do well through stage 4, and you know, you look at your schedule at the beginning of the year, and you're like, okay, stage 1 we played Vancouver, New York, you know, a bunch of the really good teams. Stage 2, same thing. Stage 3, still a hard schedule. And then stage 4, we're looking at the schedule like, oh, okay, cool. We got we're playing Florida, we're playing this team, we're playing this team. Should be a little bit easier. And then you go into those games, you're like, well, the meta changed. Like, these teams got a lot better. You look at Florida, playing Florida on Junkertown, and it's like Psy players popping off on Widow, you know, and you're going to that map like, well, we just got to hope that he doesn't pop off as hard as he can. And then he ends up having, you know, 2 records on the map. And it's like, Well, we're very lucky that we won that game because, Kriv made 2 really good sleeps. But, if the meta was the same as it was in stage 2, stage 3, stage 1, that's a game that's a lot easier. And same thing with the teams ahead of you in the playoffs. A lot of these teams were, categorically struggling in, the GOATS meta or triple DPS or whatever the case may be. And now, they have a very good understanding of the meta and they keep winning games. So it puts, more pressure on you to win games and, keep evolving and adapting quicker and quicker. So in a sense, there's, a little bit of good with that. But, at the end of the day, it's like, it's really hard, at least for me to say like, oh yeah, you should change the meta 3/4 of the way through the season, just do it in the off season, come up with a new patch and go from there.
Right. What does your team, the Valiant, practice against NWAGs all much?
Not really. I think we had maybe one practice with them, which was their warm up.
Okay.
And they looked pretty good in their warm up, and then they go on stage and it did not look good. So, and I don't know, what is the causal factor of that, but
do you have any speculation just as an observer? I mean, obviously, because the thing about their team, for me, their team in London, the part that makes it unforgivable when they do badly is you just look at the roster and you think, how? look at these players you've got.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors. That's the biggest thing. And, it's sometimes it's hard. Like, everybody puts the Scrimbucks thing out there, right? And it's like, there are these teams, like it was us in stage 1. In stage 1, like we had a little practice because of the visa issues. And then like, we're practicing, we're doing really well. And then they go on stage and they can't put it together. And, you just don't know what causes it unless you're there and can actually diagnose the problem one by one and start, going through things and be like, okay, well, it's not this, then what about this, and so on and so forth until you actually find out what the causal factor of it is. So,
do you have a theory, Gods? Have you got any the stylistic aspect, not playing well enough? Is there anything you'd pick out?
Well, I think for NYXL, they're the kind of team that fluctuates based on the meta if they can play to their style or not. And when they have to play to someone else's style or a different meta, then they don't tend to do as well. You kind of saw that when they were like playing the pure goats versus them playing the Sombra goats in like stage 3, for example. It's kind of a big difference. They were insanely good at playing the Sombra compared to other teams, and that suit their style pretty well. So right now, I think it's kind of hard to find your footing if you're kind of being forced to play May Reaper and Rush and stuff like that with Orisa. It's kind of a weird strategy, and if your team doesn't really suit that, is not suited to that, then for them, they probably just have to find something that is suited to them, that it's actually viable to play, and they'll return to form, I'd say. Because it's kind of strange when you see them underperform or you're playing against them and you press tab and you see like these massive names, this Joe and Ack, you're like, oh my god, and it's like, okay, well, I'm kind of you respect them a bit more, and then it's kind of shocking, obviously, when they don't do as well. So I think that we'll see them return to form at some point soon.
Let's talk about the actual meta, because now we're a few weeks in and we've seen it solidify, I think, a little bit more. And how important is it right now on your teams to have that great May player or that great Orisa player? Because that's more or less, it's not all May Reaper. That's mostly on control maps or on closed points like Point C on Route 66 or like very linear points on certain maps. But the May is always there pretty much, unless unless you're playing double sniper. But most of the time it's May Reaper, May Hanzo, that kind of stuff. So what is the importance right now of May in this meta? And do you need a great May player to be successful?
I'd say for both the DPS heroes in that May Reaper composition, at least, it's entirely reliant on their decision making, and it's very hard to review that. So if you have a player that just sucks at playing Reaper, then it's really hard to work on their decision making. Like in a review style, you're like, you realize why this was bad, right? And they're just like, nope. It's like, okay, right?
I feel like we're learning things about your teammates. Anyway.
No, to be honest, Logix has been doing really well in Reaper.
He has been, that's true.
When it comes to the other teams that even for us, like Negachu's really good May, Logix is really good Reaper, and we're kind of lucky that we are able to play that composition. But for some other teams where like they have a projectile player that's kind of like maybe a Genji specialist or something, and they're forced to play the May, they have absolutely no idea how to play the hero. And so I guess it's kind of just that's where the subs, I guess, come in. But not every team has a specialist for these type of weird heroes that haven't been relevant for even years in some cases.
Yeah, I think, kind of add on to that as well is I think one of the things that's maybe more important than the mechanical aspect of some of those heroes, the rest of the May, the Reaper, stuff like that is you need to have good communicators. And that doesn't mean them talking a lot. That means them being good listeners, right? Because the most important thing in this meta so far is being able to, manage these cooldowns properly, being able to chain cooldowns together properly. Are you going to fortify before you wall? Are you going to do this to stop the hook? Are you going to do how are we going to get Reaper shift? And then what do we do after that? So there's a lot of those micro decisions. And if you don't have, good listeners on the team and they don't respect each other's calls and they don't prioritize them properly, then it makes it really difficult. And you see a lot of teams go through pains like that when they'll be up 1 or 2 in a fight, and then they'll just throw it away because everybody splits and just doesn't, they don't know what the most important call is. They don't know who to listen to, what to listen to, stuff like that.
So here's a question to you based on what you guys have said. Is May Reaper just new goats? Because you talk about getting the Reaper shift away, so the Wraith form. Is that substantively similar to getting rid of a Zarya bubble in the last meta? And why I'm bringing this up is because to me, when we look at May Reaper Hog, even though I think we're moving more towards May Reaper Diva these days because it shuts down the Reaper like a little bit easier. You have a guaranteed way of stopping the Death Blossom and a lot of the incoming damage just from his normal fire. But when we're looking at what GOATS was, which was a high sustain, crowd control heavy composition that was intended to have a lot of sticking power on objectives, when we add heroes like May and Reaper that have a self-healing element that it's not as good as having a third support, but it's close, right? It's the same sort of principle. You have higher than average HP heroes that have built-in levels of sustain or crowd control. Is this like just a different variant of GOATS that we're looking at right now?
Do you want to go gods?
Stylistically, it's similar because all the heroes that are picked kind of rely on each other and work off each other's abilities really well. Whereas you see other comps where it's kind of more free-flowing, I guess, in 2-2-2. But with this, I think stylistically it's similar, but it plays to completely different strengths just to the nature of the heroes. A team that's good at GOATS is not necessarily going to be good at this comp.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think, the thing is, everybody's calling it GOATS 2.0. That's really the thing. There are similarities there, but again, like the play style of it is also really different, and the timing's really different. The engage windows are really different. So similarities and differences, but yeah, that's what everybody's calling it, at least, is GOATS 2.0. So kind of sucks, I guess.
Well, I think it's also a product of the fact that it's easy to forget, I think, that we're not actually playing on the roll lock patch, right? The point of roll lock is one of the points is to be able to balance the game better and differently. But we are playing on a patch. We have artificially roll locked the Overwatch League at a point where the game is not actually balanced to what we are doing right now. That balance patch is coming before playoffs, right? That balance patch is coming in the future. So it's a bit of an awkward situation to be playing a game that isn't balanced for what we are doing. And yet we have these restrictions that are upon us right now. Do you think that if the patch goes through that's on the test realm right now, do you think that's going to change anything, especially like massive changes to Brigitte? Have you guys started practicing at all with Sigma? Like, what's your take on the new patch? Or are you just focused on I'm sure you guys, especially the Valiant, who are attempting to make playoffs, are probably focused on the here and now. But have you given any thought to that in the future?
Yeah, for us, we're one game at a time, right? So
right.
The only thing we're thinking about we're only thinking about Boston. We haven't even started, delving into that stuff. We're like encouraging to not think about that, and just to, we always say keep the blinders on, right? For focus on Boston. We win this game. We see what happens with Chengdu this weekend, and and then we just keep going. And if there's a point that we do get into the playoffs or clinch a spot before the end of the year, then that's a discussion we could start having. We could start transitioning that practice over there because, that's what's going to be important. But yeah, for us, no, we didn't do anything on it yet.
I don't imagine you've given it any thought, have you, Gods, in terms of the actual, like, your team at least?
My team, no, we haven't really cared too much about that. I mean, we're mostly just trying to get wins on the board, so we don't really care about this new hero. And for me personally, I don't think he's like really meta defining at all. So I've been entirely ignoring him like as a hero. I don't think that it's that relevant to competitive Overwatch.
Really? Because I think you would probably be the guy who would be most likely to play him as a flex tank, right? At least that's been kind of the consensus I've been hearing from professional players.
Yeah, potentially. And whenever I see a hero that's like fit for my role, I would always give a lot of attention to it, whether I think it's going to be good or not. But in this case, I've just been kind of busy focusing on matches. So From what I've seen, though, from the hero, it seems like it's going to be very niche, it seems, from what I can tell.
Yeah, he is really weird. I mean, I think I enjoy them creating these like very niche characters because my hope is that we get to see players become specialists of them or teams become specialists of them and like have their own like unique strategy or unique compositions that come out. And he is really strange, but I'm enjoying. I mean, there's so much I think you can do with that ultimate where he pops everybody into the air. Like you can set up plays for your Widowmaker, and it's going to be interesting, I think, how that ends up working at a professional level. But I think we'll probably see some use out of him in the playoffs. Somebody's definitely going to try it. Like if I'm a team in the playoffs and I think it's a long shot that I'm going to win, you might as well try and like be the team that masters this new hero on the off chance that it ends up being super strong, or you end up discovering a strategy that other people are not going to prepare well for, right?
I mean, look at Shanghai in stage 3, right? They committed over to a completely, different strategy, basically, playing Ding like a psychopath on Pharah, and then, trying to free that space up with DM and Brig Pocket. It's like, you can find stuff that works that's non-traditional or that's outside of the box. So, I agree with you. It's one of those things. If even maybe a pocket pick, like, hey, listen, well, like we're playing against this team, maybe we have a 30% chance to win. You win a map or two, and you're like, okay, like let's just go for it, and see what happens. It could be really interesting, really exciting. So that's always a good thing.
Okay. Right, one of the teams that has had themselves a turnaround this stage and is looking like one of the better teams is obviously the Charge. Now, this is the team I wanted to ask about because in all the other stages, they were at best like a mid-table team, basically. They didn't do that well in the GOATS meta overall. What do you think about this team, Monty? Would you actually consider them among the contenders?
I mean, yes. And I think that this is the meta that we're in. So I think there's been a couple things with the Charge that have made a big difference for them. So they never lacked individual skill. Like that's a roster that has some extremely good individual players. Their issue was that they never really had the teamwork and coordination in order to make it work in GOATS. And they've been operating with a very interesting mix of Korean, Chinese, and Western players. So, communication was always going to take time and be an issue. They've been adding coaches recently, so they've been pretty aggressive when it comes to adding more and more coaching staff. Like right now, they added Cuddles, who is the former coach of the Valiant. They added Curry Shot as well from the Florida, the Mayhem Academy team. So they've been pretty aggressive about adding, like fleshing out their coaching staff. And I think that's probably been one of the factors that has helped their teamwork. But you also don't have to necessarily have the same level of teamwork that you had in GOATS, which was very exacting and precise. It still is to a degree because, like we were talking about earlier, you do have to play around Reaper and May cooldowns efficiently right now, which is still... So it's still important, but I would say it's less important than it used to be. And you can have Widow or Hanzo players just pop the fuck off and win you games at this point in time. So I think that's been really helpful to them. So I think it's been a process of getting their communication down with all of these different nationalities on their roster, as well as adding coaches and focusing more on the teamwork. and having a meta that I think is more forgiving for the Charge. But the Charge are definitely looking quite strong right now. I think they're one of the teams that have benefited the most from the meta change. And Nero turns out a very good player. He turned 18 this year, and I think has been doing super well so far. He's definitely a bright spot, I think, in the league overall.
What do you think of them packing?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a pretty darn good team right now. I know Jin, Sungwoo, and Curry Shot. Not so much with Cuddles, but I know all three of those guys are really good at what they do. I'm friends with a couple of them, and I think they're doing a good job. And it's just a testament to it's a long season. You could have struggles, and if you put the resources in the proper place, and you maybe even get a little bit lucky with where the meta comes out, or you just understand it a little bit sooner than other teams, you have a really good shot at being successful. And they're doing a great job over there. So it's definitely exciting for them. Obviously for me, I was rooting against them every match, and
Sure.
I talk to them a little bit, and I give them a little bit of shit now and then, saying I'll talk to Sungwoo and say, hey, could you please just lose a game for us? We really want to get in the play-ins, man. Could you just lose one? Give us a chance. So they're good sports, and they're good guys. So,
what is your path to the playoffs right now? Do you don't have to win every remaining game at this point? Let's take a look at you.
Yeah,
okay,
so
you do. You have to win 3 games to go 14-14. Oh, and your schedule. Yikes.
Yeah, well, I'm not really concerned about our schedule. I think we can beat any team in the league, 100%.
That's true.
You also have home field advantage for the last week.
Exactly right. And the thing is, if Chengdu, I think they're the team I'm looking at right now, and they play Shock this week. If they lose that game, we only need to win 2 out of 3 because we're gonna have better map differential, and we have
and one of those is against Boston. So you basically just have to be Gladiators, which seems doable, or Shock, which seems less doable.
Well, I think and the thing for me is obviously we haven't really practiced against either one of those teams this stage, but I don't think anybody is immortal. I mean, everybody could see that from this stage with how well Justice is doing, and Vancouver, London, New York. It depends if it's your day and you're firing on all cylinders. I mean, you could beat anybody. It does not. I really don't think that in this stage it matters who you're playing. You just need to play your best game, and if you play your best game, you're going to win. Especially if you have talented players on your team. So I'm really not concerned about who we're playing. Like I said, focused on Boston for this week, because if we don't win that one, then maybe the other ones don't even matter. Yeah. Because if Chengdu wins both their games, we need to win all 3 of ours. So you focus on the one in front of you, you win that one, then you focus on the next one, you win that one, and then you focus on the last one, you win that one. That's the only way to look at it. And if you don't look at it that way, you're looking too far in advance, and you're not going to be successful in any of them. So
I'll throw in some circumstantial reasons, Monty, as to why the victory against the Shock is more plausible than it might seem in a vacuum. First of all, the Shock play the Titans the day before.
Yes.
And then the Shock are already locked in for the playoffs, and that will be their last game. And so you could imagine a world in which you just don't try as hard, in as much as it doesn't mean anything for you necessarily.
The thing about that is the Shock are the team that always tries.
They might try and style, sure. Yeah. They might try and go extra hard.
Krusty is a coach. Yeah. Krusty is a vicious coach, and I just know that team very well, and there's no way that Krusty is going to allow his players to give an inch in that match. That's just who he is as a coach.
Just don't show your players this part. Just show the part where I hyped up all the other reasons maybe it could work, and then just cut at that point. Cut at that point in the VOD.
No, it's true. I think other teams might take it a little easier, and I'm not saying Krusty's approach is the right one, because trying to be on all the time does carry risks, right? Sure. And it does carry downsides, but that's just who he is, and that's just who the Shock are. Is they would never, I think, give up intentionally, which is why they're easy to read as a team when it comes to motivation or form, because you always know that they're mega tryharding. So it's just part of the team culture over there. I think that's going to be, but I do think your other reason for preparing for the Titans is potentially,
that's a game they definitely don't want to lose, Monty, since it could literally be the final of the whole Overwatch League.
Right. So We look at the other teams too. Like Chengdu has Houston and the Shock. Chengdu, you never know. Like they're so difficult to predict. They
never
could win or lose both of those games. Like who the fuck knows? The other team that we haven't talked about either is, in terms of falling out of the overall playoff race, is the Shanghai Dragons, who definitely could, just not even make the play-ins. Because they have to play Seoul. Their last two matches are Seoul and against the Hangzhou Spark. And the Spark are the ones that they probably will beat, which means that they'll end up at 14-14. But there's a world where they end up at 13-15 as well. Spark looked terrible, though. So probably going to not, Spark are probably not going to win that game.
I like the way Seoul is just eternally doomed to be like never truly terrible, never good though. Like they always have to like hover around that area.
It's like they can never get a win either. When we come into this meta, you're like, wow, Fleta should be
of course
incredible. And yet Fleta's nowhere to be found anymore. He gets subbed in occasionally, but for the most part, it's been Fitz and Illicit who have been playing for the Seoul roster. And it's just sort of depressing not to see Fleta after all of this time.
I've got a question for people. In light of the fact that the Titans and the Shock play, and then elsewhere you have this Justice team that's done amazingly, but as we say, isn't basically going to be in the playoffs. What's everyone's take? Who, if you had to pick right now, life or death scenario, who is the best team in the Overwatch League? Who are you picking to win the one game that you have to for your life?
Who am I picking? I'm picking my team. I'm picking my team. That's why I pick them every time, 10 out of 10 times. That's why.
If your team was excluded, though, because obviously everyone would pick the Valiant, but no, if your team was excluded, who would you pick? By the way, in that scenario, listen, I appreciate the sentiment, but you're probably dead. So, I like the sentiment though.
He's playing fast and loose with his life right now.
I like your sentiment though. I like the confidence, put it that way. So,
if my team wasn't available, let's see. Maybe the Charge. Yeah, I think the Charge are doing. Like I said, they're doing one hell of a job right now.
That's a bold one.
And their team plays great. They have good ideas of what they're doing on each map. And the other thing is they just seem to be everything seems to be like bouncing their way. So you can't go wrong with that.
Okay, who are you going to go for, Gods? Who's the best in your mind?
Well, to be honest, I was going to say the same, just because their Charge is like a very non-traditional team. It seems like in the way they play the game. And so them matching up against whoever would be versus them in the grand finals, I guess, would be I think it could go either way in Charge's favor, probably more times than not. I would say the same thing for Justice, though. They're just very unpredictable. Like they're the type of team where you never really know what they're going to play and how well their players are going to do. And especially in Justice case, like Corey just randomly playing insane, or Nero for Charge, it's just like you're just like, whoa, calm down, bud. Like when you play against, like, okay, relax, dude. It's just a scrim, calm down, stop popping off. But yeah, I think I would go with Justice or Charge probably for some of the best teams in the game.
Okay, where are we going, Monty? Can you see? So far, they've gone with the current meta and the strength.
You basically are saying that Charge are the favorites to win the Overwatch League right now, right? If you're saying that they are the strongest team in the current meta as we are approaching the end of stage 4, so your prediction is Charge will win the Overwatch League.
Well, I mean, there's a correction to that. I say if we get into the plains, then we're the favorite to win. But if we don't,
that goes without saying, But yeah,
I think that the Charge are really good at this meta, and they understand it. They understand it right now. And like I said, anybody can beat anybody. So. A little bit of a different play style. They're on a hot streak. It's easy to win when you're winning. And they're going to believe that they can go in there and they can win every game. So, that's that'll be my take at least.
There's no way the Charge is your pick, Monty. Come on, who is it? Is it the Shock?
The Shock.
There we go. Of course.
Like I think the Shock are also extremely good at this meta, and we have now.
I mean, what meta aren't they good at this point in time?
Well, I mean, it helps that they have just an insane bench.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Like, yeah, we don't see a lot of these players for the majority of the season, but guess what? Right as we hit into this meta, then Smurf's there. It's like Moth and 5 Koreans, which I don't even know how they're communicating. It's kind of objectively hilarious, but I mean, Rascal is popping the fuck off right now. His Pharah looks absolutely insane. And they have the flexibility to play Architect on the Pharah too. So they've been kind of switching that hero back and forth. We haven't seen Striker, but just having Architect and Rascal in at the damage dealing positions and putting Smurf in it because I guess he's just a better Orisa than Super is, has been really effective. But this team has such an extremely deep bench that, I mean, now that they've figured out their starting roster, because remember, it took a while at the start of the season with Goats for them to really land on their starting six. But once they did, it was just domination, right? And if we look at their performance in this week in particular, it wasn't even close. Like, they completely dumpstered the fuel yesterday. And I think they just look terrifying at the moment. So I think it's definitely the Shock are still the favorites. Now, the question is, can they close out the season with some tough games? I mean, that last week, we talked about it. The Titans and the Valiant are not an easy schedule, right? And Chengdu can also create random upsets. So their schedule is hard, but they have a strong schedule that I think is going to prepare them to enter the playoffs in a very good state, right? Yeah. Like, we're going to have a lot of information about how good the Shock are simply because of their remaining games.
I do appreciate, though, that like the 2-2-2 lock has been a cursed monkey paw scenario, because what happened is when everyone heard it was coming in, they were like, oh, great, we're going to get to see all those great DPS players we have. You'll never see Striker playing the game. Well, I thought we were going to see him. And then the next finger on the cursed monkey paw, all right, I better be more specific with my pick. I want to see all the great DPS players they play again. They can play, but they're playing main Reaper. Fucking hell, like, can I get a break in here? What is this? Like,
yeah, and you're not going to see
bad
there. Or Pine, like, life sucks.
My favorite meme is I can't wait to see the main tanks play Winston again. That's
right. There we go.
Just jumps in and gets frozen. It's like, okay.
Horse is just better.
Indeed. Ironically, the best time for Fisher to leave the game, Monty. Pick the right time. Pick the right time.
Yeah, the main tank play is kind of depressing right now because of the Orisa dominance. At least we have some wrecking ball. That's kind of fun.
He'll just get frozen and killed. It's all right.
It's true.
What about a team I guess we should talk about, because what's interesting is they've always been good for so long that they're always like on the periphery of discussions or getting brought up as the Gladiators. So where's the Gladiators at now, Packy? Your key rivals who indeed you play in one of those ladder matches in the home stand actually to get into the playoffs hopefully. So where's your rival at?
Yeah, I think they're definitely not a bad team. I think it just comes down to execution. If they're on, they're a really good team. If they're not, then they're beatable just like anybody else. And it's just kind of a testament to the meta as well as sure for he could play really really well and it's really difficult. I've seen him playing Hanzo the past couple of weeks and he looked really really good. So it makes it really hard to win when players are playing like that. So. It just kind of depends, but I think they're definitely a good team. Beatable 100%. But yeah, definitely a good team. So,
what do you think about your old mate Surefour there, Gods?
I think this meta is actually pretty good for Surefour, and I'm actually kind of surprised that he's not playing Mei. Because he's actually good at like all those weird heroes. Like he's been playing like Reaper
I'm
for them.
super surprised he's not playing Mei. That's like the weirdest thing to me.
Because he's like one of those players, kind of like Mangachu is like that as well, where they just kind of play. They're also like they're good at the core heroes, but then like the weird ones, they're also good at that. And like that's one of Surefour's strengths is like people talk about his flexibility, and that's what he has though. Like he actually has it for like the weird heroes that you don't expect people to be good at. So I'm kind of surprised he's not playing it.
I think actually, if you look, Monty, over the whole period of the Overwatch League, obviously in his metas particularly, he's been one of the absolute best players. Full stop. Forget just like Western and Korean. Like he's been amazing at times when he can play DPS.
Yeah, he's a fantastic player, and he's just so versatile. I think that's what Gods is talking about here is that he can play a lot of those weird heroes, and that's what's been interesting to me about. So to talk about the Gladiators, so they're one of only two teams in the league that actually loses more than their average number of team fights when they use Blizzard. Like think about that. So they actually dipped before I was casting their match this last week. The stat was that when they use Blizzard, they have a 3% lower than their average chance of winning a team fight. So they actually get worse when they use one of the best ults in the game.
The joke there is just stop using it.
Well, I mean, it's almost like Decay is so,
doesn't make sense.
Like Decay is so bad at May that it's like comical that they're winning in spite of having like a bad May player on their team. And I just don't get why you would put Decay on the May when, as Gods is saying, like Surefour, I 100% believe can play a better May than Decay. And
Decay was brought in to be this massive salary, super duper superstar player who's going to go ham.
Well, he was, but he was also brought on because of his strength in the GOATS meta. And also, like, he's mostly a hit scan player. I mean, that's not true. He plays Genji as well.
A little bit of a flex here.
Yeah, he's a bit of a flex. He does have a pretty good hero pool. But I would just think that he would be better on the Reaper, and I would think that anything would be better than Decay on May at this point in time. Only the Gladiators and the Paris Eternal have a lower than average teamfight win percentage when they use Blizzard. It's weird. And I think that this is a problem that they've got to solve, and I don't get it. Like, they could be so good with a better May player. I think it's their main issue right now.
What do you think of the Gladiators, Gods, as a team? I only asked you about Surefour before, so what about as a squad?
Well, I think they're kind of trying to find their footing a little bit in this meta. It was same for a lot of teams. That roster in general is quite strong, so when you see them have issues like kind of what we're seeing right now, it's a little bit confusing, their inconsistencies. So I'm not really sure where to place them. I think they're one of those teams right now where you just can't really tell how good they really are. And if they show up on the day, then they're going to be insane. But if they aren't prepared or aren't good at certain maps in their pool, then they're going to falter. And so I guess we'll see in the next match.
Are they? By the way, Monty, I know you're like friendly with him. DP was pretty cocky when he came on the last episode. Like he at one point, I believe he even tried to say that he's like the best coach or something, and big himself up massively. So not like people often do. Right? Are they actually a team who, like, do they think they're the best team, that they're going to win the Overwatch League?
I mean, I think they're an extremely well-coached team historically. They come up with a lot of weird Gladiator-specific strats. Like they're smart. They're a smart team. I think if Gladiators can, I feel like, so at the start of this season, remember how we were talking a lot about the Gladiators being a team that so first off, I don't think Roar is very good, just to put that out there. I think he's a massive downgrade over Fissure and has never really gelled with the team properly. And I think that that's a player that I would be looking at least getting a backup for and trying to create some competition at that position. But at the start of the season, it felt like their Korean players were like their tank line was just like flying off into the ether and just doing their own thing. And so it was like their front line, their back line were not working together well. And they had to solve that issue, especially when they would get picked off first. That was their biggest problem, is that they would lose a player first in team fights way too often. So they ended up fixing that issue and looking good. So we know that they're capable of making these changes. And I think that if they do either get Decay in a better position on the May, like he's coached up or practices a bit more and gets the ult usage under his belt, then I think that they could be a strong team. Or if they just switch the May player. So I always feel like the Gladiators, this is the second time this season where I felt like there needs to just be like a small tweak, and then they're going to be really good. The other thing that's
they've had some great wins. Like some of the wins have had to be big time this stage.
Yeah. And the other thing about the Gladiators is that coming into this stage, they actually had a horrific record against teams in the top 8, like playoff teams. I think Mr. X brought this up on one of his broadcasts of the Gladiators, where he showed a statistic where it was like, if they play, it was their record versus like current playoff teams versus not playoff teams. And they're actually like really bad against top teams. So in a way, they've sort of been like a gatekeeper to the top 8, where they've done very poorly against those teams, but have absolutely dominated weaker teams. That said, this stage, they beat the NYXL, which I guess in retrospect doesn't look that impressive. And they played the shot close. So, and they also reverse swept the Dallas Fuel. So they were able to make some good halftime adjustments and come out.
I mean, taking the shock to 5 games is no joke, even if you lose.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I think they're like one step away in terms of their May play of being a very good team. And it's just about whether they solve that in time for the playoffs or not.
I would keep in mind as well that the meta has drastically changed since the beginning of the stage. Like as soon as
Yes.
222 came out, teams were running Orisa Hog May, and then people started beating that with 2 Sniper, so everyone's running that. And then now people are majorly running the May Reaper stuff and sometimes Hog on the map. So I think it's just like the teams are still adjusting, and the teams that maybe like if you look strong at the start of the stage doesn't mean you're going to be strong at the end or going to be strong in playoffs. So I think we're going to see like a power shift for sure. You're already seeing it.
Here's a depressing thought for you, Monty. What if, no matter how you lock the game, no matter how you balance the game, it turns out Overwatch as a game just naturally is compelled to become a form of GOATs, and it's just different. It's like different combinations of GOATs, and every stage is, no matter what you change, is a Rubik's cube where whoever gets all the colours on the right GOAT side, they're just the best team. Your nightmare, basically. You're waking up in a fevered dream. Oh, Jesus, I thought GOATs lasted forever.
Well, I think at that point you'd have to really consider the core issue of sustain in the game. And I think that I think that moving to role lock allows you to reduce sustain in easier ways, right? Because
like this reminds me, Monty, of when in League we had a season, it was literally like half a decade ago now, where unfortunately they'd buffed defensive parts of the runes,
Yes,
which is obviously a different
that was
part of
horrible.
having. And basically it made it so that every comp had to be like heavily tanky, had to be like, it was like lower kill games, less action, and it just unfortunately was like the game itself kind of suggested that was the way you had to play.
yes, and a lot of that was tank itemization as well at the time. It was the Mundo meta. It was really bad. And so I think that I think at this point they would have to look at sustain in general, and figure out whether this much sustain is really what they would want in terms of balance in the game, because it's about sticking power to an objective. And that's what created GOATs, is like the stickiness that you have. And that's what's creating this May meta, is when you have Fortify on the Orisa and you have Ice Block so the May can heal, and then you have Ice Wall so that you can block off line of sight so you don't take damage or you can't get picked off by hooks or whatever, what have you, right? So it leads, the teams are moving towards extended team fights based around cooldown timings, which is what GOATs is. Like, if we have to distill GOATs down to its GOATs core, it is high sustain, high HP pools, ability to stay on an objective, and it is about two teams playing around each other's cooldowns and trying to bait them out effectively. And that's still what we're dealing with.
That's actually a concern I have, though, which is that this is one of the areas where if you're going to balance the game and make it the same game in pro as in amateur, well, one of the problems is half of the stuff you just described isn't going to happen if someone plays ranked. Like, they're not going to have that coordination. They're not going to play that comp. They're definitely not going to play it at the level someone will do and whoever the best team is in Overwatch League. So it's going to be very tricky what Blizzard does if they're going to try making literal hero balance, how they like adapt the game in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think it's easier in role lock. It's easier to do that.
Sure.
But, I mean, there are some really big changes that if they go through from the test realm, like, for example, I think, what is it? I forget the exact number. Is it 20% ult increased charge across the board? That's pretty huge, taking 20% longer to get another ult up. I think that's going to pretty drastically change things.
Yeah.
So,
What do you think that will affect the most? Like, is there an obvious like role or heroes that will immediately become less viable?
I think it's just everybody. Yeah.
Probably May and Zarya, though, because so here's the thing: the more you increase in Overwatch, we already saw this, by the way. I think people probably don't remember, but remember, like a couple years ago, they increased ults by 25% charge time across everybody. So that was a thing that we've already seen happen. And I think that what this does is the longer it takes to build an ult, then heroes that are very ult reliant, like Zarya, become less good because you have the Graviton surge up less frequently. And then it prioritizes, especially, I think, hit scan DPS heroes, because at that point, the level of impact that you have with Zarya is proportional to the amount of graviton surges that you're getting up there. Sure. So if that becomes less good because you have fewer graviton surges, then high impact heroes become the ones that you can do stuff with more frequently. And that becomes aim reliant heroes, damage dealing heroes, I think in particular. So because right now the way the game is balanced is that hit scan heroes typically have weak ultimates because you can make very impactful plays with them without any abilities.
Just attacking basically.
Right.
It's half the point of having it, right?
So that's kind of, I guess, my theory on the game is that we will probably see the more we increase ult uptime, then heroes with weaker ults but strong general presence will become increasingly important, and most of those heroes are damage heroes.
Would you welcome that, Gods?
I think I would welcome the ult changes in a way that's going to make it drastically different, where it's not every fight is going to be multiple ults being used. So maybe not like a 20%, but maybe even more. I've always been for that change because I think the game being played around ults is just a bit boring, to be honest. When you're going into a fight and it's kind of just like ults back and forth, I kind of appreciate the game more on like a mechanical level. And so that's kind of just how I view the game. That's how I prefer it to be. That being said, though, I think it probably won't go to that degree. I think that changes to ult charge will probably not have a drastic impact on the comps being played. I don't think anyone looks at it and is like, well, it's going to take me too long to build my Mei ults. Well, you're just rushing in and walling and freezing people anyway. So I don't think it's often right now where people are picking heroes just based on their ultimates. So I don't think it'll drastically change the game in the future, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Where do you come down on it?
The other reason why they can't increase ult charge further, and I would like to see that selfishly because of the professional level, but you have to consider the plebs. And the plebs are so bad at Overwatch that like if I have an entire like attack round, or like let's say I'm playing control and I'm in silver, you have to make it so that people can generate at least one ult in like a control point, even if you're horrifically bad at the game. So that's why we can't scale ults charge up to the point where I would like to see it, because
anytime
it would be horrible for the plebs.
Anytime you talk about how overpowered like a hero is, and as in just the hero itself is broken, not the players playing, just you owe it to yourself to go on a Smurf account and play a low-level game and watch what all the other players in the game do when they have that hero. And you'll soon find out, like, some of them just have amazing kits, and like, yeah, an amazing player will be ulti OP, but like, if you see how bad some players are at the low, like, it's unbelievable. And they don't even use some of the basic abilities. Like, they don't know what they're doing with it.
Right, and people, like, the fantasy of Overwatch is to be able to come in with your ultimate. And so you have to program the game in a way where even if they miss every shot over time, they're still going to get an ult, right? Because that's part of fun for plebs.
As opposed to in your world, Monty, like, unless you get like a certain amount of performance, you never get an ult. It's like
exactly.
Dessert for a naughty boy. It's like, unless you eat your vegetables, you don't get your desserts. Like, no, fucking...
Yeah, I'm right there with you, though. I mean, I think, especially like super fast building ults, you got the and the ones that impact the game tremendously, like we saw with the emergence of Sombra Goats, because of how quick you were able to build EMP. You're able to I mean, I don't know what the final number was on it, but good players are building it in way less than a minute, right? So it makes it better and makes it more like holistic, because if you mess it up, then you're not going to have a chance to do it again in the next fight. And it actually makes that team play and the coordination and everything go up. But yeah, I think 20% is probably still a little bit low. And I think like God said, I don't think it's really going to impact like the hero selection as much. I mean, maybe a little bit more, well, I mean, there's snipers are getting played now anyway. So snipers are always going to be good because they have that one-shot ability. But yeah, I mean, Mei, you're going to walk into them and freeze them anyway. Those heroes are powerful because of their, I mean, yes, Blizzard is really good, but Death Blossom as an ult is horrible. They're good because of their cooldowns, not because of their ult.
See, Monty's actually accidentally backed into another cursed monkey paw scenario because he thinks, oh, brilliant, increase ult times. And then what happens is, more DPS. But instead, everyone still plays the original comps. Now the team fights are even more extended, Monty. Now they end even later.
I think what I just hate about Mei is Ice Block as an ability. I think they just need to change that.
Great.
It's because one of the things I hate in games in general, I realise this is a part of making games that are balanced and have lots of different styles. I hate things where basically your job is just to stop the other person having fun. Like, I like things where you have fun and everyone, and like, I don't like in Dota or something, you know, let's all just pick overpowered shit and just all go crazy and see who wins. In other games, it's like, my job is just to ruin your game and make it really
but this
shit
is why
for
I
you.
love Nunu in League of Legends, is because he's just such an annoying sack of shit that, like, shuts down the enemy jungler.
It's just for
and he's a jerk.
misanthropes. That's all it's for. It's just people who hate the world and they don't like themselves either. On some level, they hate themselves. Exactly. On some level, they also hate themselves, but they just would think, fuck, everyone should suffer like I should, right? Or fuck your game up.
Well, why is it in all these games too that it's some sort of like ice-based hero that is always the one
what's that all about?
ruins other people's experiences? That's like a weird.
Who's writing this? George R.R. Martin. What's the fucking bias here, mate?
I think though that just in general, Mei as a hero, like her kit works perfectly fine without her having ice block, and ice block is actually just a pointless ability that is just super annoying. I mean, she's already annoying enough. She can already wall herself off from people, so she has that survivability. But I think that ability just needs to be changed into something else, because just her sitting, like the stall effect too of her sitting on the fucking point in ice block is just so stupid that, yeah, I haven't really thought about it until this point in time, but I just hate that one ability of hers. I think it would be a lot better if she didn't have it.
I think the main thing that makes Mei viable right now is just her left click spam. Like the idea that it just cleaves, slows you, and if her hero retained ice block and they completely reworked her left click, I feel like it would be a lot more balanced. Like I think that honestly her left click is like the worst thing that Overwatch has ever had. Like I hated Sombra, but at least I could stop her from
yes.
You know, a Mei just walks in with 250 health, and if she starts freezing someone, they have to just run away or they die. It's like, all right.
That's a fun experience as well, trying to get away from that.
Straight. Diva player tilted that the one ability he can't block with defense matrix.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
That does make sense.
And I'm the primary target as well.
You get one tick of freeze on you, and it's like that's the same thing with like Hammond, right? Like if he's going for like a set rollout and then they get one tick of freeze on him, well, guess what? He's probably gonna die. It's like the left click is like super OP. I mean, I don't like the left click or the ice block, but you got to pick your poison, right? Even if they removed one or reworked one, that'd be at least a start, right? So,
I'm not saying I think ice block is the most OP thing. I'm just saying I don't like ice block because it's just annoying, and I don't understand why she has to have that ability.
The issue I have with Mei's left click is that it tends to make other heroes, like some heroes, just non-viable. Like you really cannot play Winston or Hammond into a Mei or Reinhardt for that matter. That's literally why everyone plays Orisa, because Orisa's shift gets him out of that situation. Because you start getting pros, you just press shift and walk out. Like that's actually part of the meta. Is people were initially running a lot of Reinhardt on like Control Shin or Li Zhang and stuff like that. But then there's just Mei walking behind your shield, freezing you, and there's nothing you can do. And so like that's like the most frustrating thing is just having a hero that makes other heroes non-viable. I mean, we kind of saw that from Sombra, but that was just because she was so powerful. At this point, like Mei is like actually oppressing the meta. It's kind of crazy.
And you have to play it yourself. It's just so ubiquitous in that sense as well. So it's also not as ideal. I think generally, like obviously this is the easiest thing to say and the hardest thing to do. I prefer it generally when it's not as obvious what all the comps are going to be. When there's like a lot of variance, and as a result, the dream obviously is you just build the comp based on your personnel largely.
Well, and it's also the fact that at its core, what you hope from Overwatch as a game, like one of its unique mechanics is that you're not locked into heroes when you start the game. There's no draft phase, it's not a MOBA.
Yeah,
so like,
you don't want more swapping out.
World,
right?
What you want is a lot of swapping for comp counters and like really fun changes within a map. That's the ideal, right?
Sure.
That's what we all want to see as fans or as players and analysts is like, you want to see a lot of really cool adaptation within a game.
Would also bring in a lot more shot calling elements of like, right, we need to swap to this now, let's do this, or things you do on the fly.
Yeah. I mean, that's so anything that creates like, this is what I'm excited for in Roll Lock is that now that we know that there can only be 2 tanks and 2 damage and 2 supports, you can actually balance in a way where heroes have much more distinct identities. Like we talked about with Brigitte coming into this next patch, like she has a healing increase because now we know she can't be played with 2 other supports. She needs more healing, and they're starting to change her kit around it in ways that I think are really good. And she is quickly I think she will become the dive counter that she was intended to be without being like an oppressive goats enabler, right? So I'm very interested in where the balance team goes with this, and I'm hoping that you can make heroes more specialized and niche. Because like I would love to see just more increased specialization of heroes so that they have discrete uses in compositions, and we can see more interesting counters.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you right there. I think like that's the good thing about the role lock. But in the same respect, like if we look back to the end of stage 3, right? I think those playoffs were one of the most exciting playoffs in the history of Overwatch League, because every single team that was in there had a different identity as to what compositions they were going to play, as to what they were good at. I mean, you had Shanghai's playstyle, you had us, you had Spark, the Bap Goats from Shock. Like everybody was playing different things and had, different concrete identities and strategies, and it kind of felt like, oh hey, the game's getting to a really good place where like people aren't just running goats. And then they come into roll lock, and it's like week 1 of roll lock. I remember someone was saying like, oh my god, there were so many different compositions run and this and that and everything in week 1, because there were teams like us who wanted to play dive, and then other teams were running bunker and this, that, and everything else. And then the next week it's like, okay, everybody's playing May Reaper, everybody's playing May Hanzo. Like if you don't play that and you try to play dive into it, well, guess what, you're going to insta lose. So positives and negatives, right? But if they get the balancing right, which hopefully happens, it'll be really exciting. So
that was one thing I will give credit for to Goats Monty. Is like, even though early on it was literally the same comps over and over again with very little variation, by the end it actually had a lot of variety. It's just everything was a variant of goats.
Well, I mean, except for dragons, right?
Sure.
So I think that yes, but we have to look at how we got there, though. It took a long time for teams to realize, especially the dragons, how to execute on DPS, because we've talked about this on the show. What they were doing, like if you could perfectly execute that DPS, there actually wasn't a lot of goats counterplay, because you can slowly poke somebody off the point and they're just never going to be in range of you. The problem is like if they ever catch somebody out, then the whole thing just resets, right? And you just wasted like 2 minutes of your attack round like poking them for no reason. So it was very execution focused for the dragons to get good enough, but they also we only saw this after months and months and months of teams practicing goats and then figuring out their own identity. And while I think what we're seeing right now is like what we saw in the early stages of goats, which is that teams are focusing around like the easiest to play, strongest comp right now. And that doesn't mean that there aren't counters to it. It's just going to take time. But there's been such a massive shift that we're probably just not going to see it this season unless we see it like deep into the playoffs at some point in time, right? So
maybe these guys can tell us, in scrims, do you see more variants? Like, do people try a lot of things they don't bring out in the stage matches?
Nope. A lot of May Reaper. Because the way it works, I mean, it's the same as on stage, right? You might try May Widow, you might try something different, you might try a fairer comp, and then you win one fight, the other team swaps May Reaper, you lose, you go back to spawn, you swap May Reaper, and then it's practicing the fundamentals on that instead. And like that's the thing that's tough. And I think the thing that's increasingly difficult here is, for the teams that are going to make the play-in and the playoffs is, maybe there is a chance for a meta change there. So this meta that evolved right now may not be the same meta in 3 weeks from now. Just based off of the hero changes and Sigma being involved and stuff like that. We can't, until you start practicing it. We can't really tell. You could theory craft on paper, like you said before with the DPS, Monty. It's like, hey, in a perfect world, like this should win every time.
Yes.
But we don't live in a perfect world.
No.
And people make mistakes. And, once you put that human element in there, and you go through all the human factors and all that stuff, and then the psychological factor of, hey, you just wasted 2.5 minutes because you screwed up your first attack. Well, then what are you going to do? So a lot of factors that go in there, but, we'll see what happens in the play-ins and the playoffs for, hopefully an evolved meta from May Reaper at least.
Is it similar for you, Gods?
Well, from what I can tell, as far as like the meta goes, at least the May Reaper stuff really picks your opponent into a corner, where it's like you can only come out on a certain number of different comps in order to actually beat it. And it just so happens that the mirror is pretty much the best way to beat that comp and stop their snowball. Because if you end up swapping to something like teams are normally starting not on the May Reaper stuff, like especially on specific maps where high ground is strong. But as soon as that point is lost, it's like, okay, the next point, like King's Row first, for example, like maybe you start on high ground with snipers or something, defending it, that the team rolls you through the first fight, they're attacking with May Reaper, and then you have to swap. Like you have to swap to mirror them in order to actually win the next fight, have a chance to. So right now, I think the biggest issue in the meta is that it just picks you into that corner where it's like, okay, well, the best way to beat them is to mirror them. And so I think that's kind of like the main frustration from my end, I think.